To introduce Carolyn, I would just like to say that she is the director of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and she was appointed to that position in February 5th, 2003, and reappointed in October 9th, 2009. Prior to her appointment, she was the director of AHRQ's Center for Outcomes and Effectiveness Research. She is a general internist and health services researcher, is a graduate of Boston College and the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Following her clinical training in internal medicine, Dr. Clancy was a Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. And before joining AHRQ in 1990, she was also an assistant professor in the Department of Internal Medicine at the Medical College of Virginia. Dr. Clancy holds an academic appointment at George Washington University School of Medicine and serves as a senior associate editor for the Journal of Health Services Research. I think she's well known to many of us, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Clancy.
Well, thank you very much, Marita, and good afternoon, everyone. It is lovely to hear your voice, Dr. Titler, second only to my being there, which would, of course, been much nicer, and that didn't turn out to be feasible today. I have to say that every time I think of implementation science, what I think of is when you served on our National Advisory Council and would actually share details with other council members about what was involved in your work for the agency under the one of our earlier TRIP initiatives for translating research into practice. So it's really an honor to be with you today. If there's one message that from ARC's perspective I would leave you all with in terms of implementation science is that it's not purely a scientific enterprise, which is not to say we don't need really superb scientific methods. We do, and then some. But actually making implementation happen is a team sport that extends, members of the team extend well beyond research colleagues, way beyond other disciplines of research colleagues, but really to people who have operational roles in healthcare, to patients, clinicians, and the like. And so, do I say next slide, or am I driving? I'll do this. So, another way of saying it is that healthcare is at something of a critical fork in the road. On one side, we have a path that continues to frustrate clinicians, confuses patients, and is associated with a payment and reimbursement system that some would say is actually toxic in terms of improving quality and value. Or do we align quality and value efforts with care where it matters at the front line, with clinicians, with patient values and preferences, and so forth? And Marita, if there's one thing I remember you were talking about your work, it was all about the science and the research, of course, but also what it took to bring that down to frontline nurses. So it stayed with me all this time. Now, that great philosopher shown here, Yogi Berra, once said that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. So actually making all this work, I think, is both challenging, exhilarating, exciting, but not for the faint of heart. So what I'm going to talk about are what are some of the missing pieces with respect to implementation science, and then shift gears to talk about training and funding for doing that work, what it takes to move from knowledge to practice, and then a little bit about where to from here. And I'm very, very eager to hear your questions, comments, even outright disagreements. So for those of you who are not familiar with ARC, this is a pie chart I use a lot just to illustrate what are the big priorities for our work. We are probably the world's premier funder for research on patient safety, which includes generating new knowledge all the way through projects like in the great state of Michigan, the Keystone Project. Implementation at its finest, certainly in terms of the success rate We also have had the privilege of supporting work and having very explicit authority for evaluating the effectiveness and comparative effectiveness of healthcare services broadly defined. We make a whole lot of data available for researchers, as a platform for quality indicators, and so forth. And I guess I should mention this week that we also sponsor the scientific work of the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. So our focus and strategic goals are shown on this slide. It's about the right care at the right time to the right patient, reducing the risk of harm, enhancing access to effective healthcare services, and reducing unnecessary costs, maybe one of the toughest nuts to crack. And the fourth, effectiveness, improving healthcare outcomes by encouraging the use of evidence to make more informed healthcare decisions. So the question is, this all sounds great, and it sounds like where the rubber meets the road, but what's missing here? And I thought this quote from a team at UNC really said it all. The use of effective interventions without implementation strategies is like a serum without a syringe. The cure is available, but the delivery system is not. And I think one of the biggest challenges we share in this implementation science arena is literally defining what is the delivery system, and probably at least as important, what is the context in which that delivery system operates. So why it matters, I think, is self-evident, but to belabor the obvious for just a moment, as a nation, we have an enormous base and depth of scientifically rigorous research, evidence-based interventions and practices, very highly trained clinicians, more and more healthcare organizations using health information technology, some of them having even gotten to the point where it not only adds value, but it adds joy to the workday. That would be a small number. But what we need is knowledge and insight about how to transfer and maintain interventions in the real world of patients, payers, communities, and families. Because if there's one thing that people whose business is actually running healthcare organizations or providing care directly, the one question they all have is, how do I do that? That sounds great. We want to do it too. Tell me how. How can I do it where we provide care? Now, I would say as a body of work, we're still in the basic terminology phase, which is not a bad place to be, because I would also assert that a big portion of implementation science is literally learning a new vocabulary. This is not all about science vocabulary. Some of it is very much about making sure that the other members of the team with whom your efforts are interdependent, if the science is actually in the service of improving health care, may use different words to describe the same phenomenon. And even just limiting ourselves to the scientific domain, there are sort of broad, fuzzy areas that I, for one, am still trying to sort through. Some people talk about translational science, obviously a huge part of the CTSA program. Implementation science, sometimes dissemination and implementation science, seems to be creating its own community. And others talk about improvement science, hence I've drawn this little Venn diagram here. I have a feeling we're going to exist with this sort of lack of clean, bright boundaries for a while. But generally, I think that's okay. If you like being on the ground floor of a really exciting area, you've picked the right place.